Hi guys, so let's now have a look at negative consumption externalities. Right, so this occurs when the marginal private benefit of consumption is greater than the marginal social benefit. Okay, so the marginal private benefit to the individual is greater than the benefit to society of the consumption of that good. Examples often cited in these circumstances include tobacco, sugar, alcohol, as well as other illicit drugs. So there's a number of good examples that you can use, and of course there's various policy decisions which affect the actual market operations within each of these areas here. Now, of course, this is another scenario of market failure. Because we see those differences between the actual marginal private and social benefits, so we're going to have allocative inefficiency within the marketplace once again. So let's take a look at the diagram for this. Now we've got our 6-step approach that we looked at last time. You can see I've labelled the heading for the diagram. Negative consumption externality. Negative, that implies a shift to the left of consumption, which is demand, of course. So let's draw out our x-axis. Let's do that first up. There we go, nice and straightforward. So now we've got to actually use the heading to label the curves, okay? Because we're focusing on consumption, we're focusing on the fact that marginal private benefit and marginal social benefit are different. Therefore, we'll label our marginal private benefit, and we know that's greater than the MSB. Let's just put down marginal cost there. So we're assuming that the marginal private cost equals the marginal social cost. Yes, it is a big assumption, but these diagrams are just quite useful in helping us to understand what is actually playing out in the marketplace. So let's just put in our free market equilibrium that we have as so, Q1 and P1, there it is. Now the next thing we've got to do is think about shifting the curve. Which way do we shift it? Well, it's negative, so we shift it to the left, of course. So we're shifting the demand or the consumption curves, aren't we? Okay, so therefore we've got our marginal social benefit here, and we can actually see in this circumstance, let's label it in a different color, that we actually have the social optimum at Q star here, which of course is lower and a lower price level there. Okay, so there we go. That's fairly straightforward, I think. You know, if you're thinking about what the social benefits are with regard to these types of goods, of course, the social benefits would include the fact that it does actually provide jobs, it does provide tax revenue, and so on. Okay, so there are a number of social benefits that can be cited in relation to these so-called demerit goods. Okay. Nice one. So this is looking good. What we now want to do is make sure we highlight our negative consumption externality. Now the little deadweight loss triangle will again point to the left. It always points to the left when it's negative, always points to the right when it's positive. So here it is. We can see the extent of that externality here, where the actual marginal private benefit is greater than the marginal social benefit, and therefore there is our externality right there, pointing us back to the social optimum here, okay, of P star, Q star. So the question is, how can we actually bring back demand so that these people that are consuming too much of these goods, and this good is over-consumed now, how can we actually restrict their consumption? Can we do this in a way which doesn't require big intervention? Well, let's take a look. Well, you could use indirect taxation, of course, so you can tax the good. That would shift the actual marginal cost curve to the left, of course, so we'll look at that in just a moment. That's the one that's, of course, most commonly used. Then we've got information provision. So can you actually provide better information? So we see such examples when it comes to the traffic light system on food, for instance, trying to encourage people to make better behavioural decisions and more rational decisions based on that traffic light approach with the fat, the saturates, the sugar, the salt, etc. Okay, what about advertising bans? Okay, well, of course, we've seen those with regard to tobacco there. Now, it could also be about having a minimum price level. Well, would that work? Okay, because that's certainly touted with alcohol, and Scotland indeed does have a minimum price per unit. And then you've got full-on prohibition, so outright bans of the actual product because they are so bad for consumption. So there's a variety of measures that can actually be used, and again we'll look at these in turn later on. But let's just take the indirect taxation. This is a nice easy one to actually put on our diagram here. If we just take this point, this social optimal level of production or consumption rather, so this is our socially optimal level. Just remember that what we want to do is we don't want consumption taking place beyond that level. So if we impose an indirect tax on there, then we can see marginal cost plus tax in line with the social optimum. That would also raise the price of the good as well. So we can see that the price level has risen quite dramatically in this scenario. Now, of course, this has been used very heavily with regard to tobacco, also with alcohol, and more recently with regard to sugar. Now, how great will the actual impact be? Well, it depends. It depends upon the actual price elasticity of demand. For a smoker who's addicted to nicotine, they may still have to actually go and buy those products despite that hugely raised price. So it does depend upon that. Now, in the longer term, however, of course, we see less and less people actually smoking, and that is partly because they are discouraged by the high prices, so it imposes a big barrier to entry into actually starting smoking in the first place. So that's an interesting point. Now, once again, we can also question the ability of the government to actually impose an appropriate level of taxation, which is directly in line with the social optimum. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be imperfect in its implementation, really. So we are not likely to achieve such an outcome as this, where suddenly the marginal cost plus the tax means that we're back at our social optimum. Because what is the social optimal? You know, that's not the social optimal for these individuals that enjoy consuming these goods. So it's very much and very, very difficult to actually foresee where that socially optimal level is. The government possesses imperfect information. There we go, guys. Great stuff. See you next time.